I truly haven't eaten anything for 2 days. I truly never laid a hand on him.
After more than 30 years sitting on this marble bench, ever since the very first day I took my oath, I thought I had seen every dark corner a courtroom could expose to a man. I thought I had heard every expensive excuse, witnessed every crocodile tear, and understood every kind of courage that pain could forge. But then, on one freezing Thursday morning, something happened. Something that pierced right through the iron armor a judge spends his entire life building. Even now, whenever I recall that moment, my chest tightens. Are you curious about this story? If you are, do me a favor right now. Stay with me until the very last second. Because what unfolded next didn't just shock a seasoned veteran like me. I promise you, it will haunt you long after I have finished telling it. There are days when the law appears clear and clean. You read a statute, look at the evidence, and deliver a verdict. It seems neat, simple, and orderly. But life is never neat, and human beings are never simple creatures. Life walks through those heavy oak doors, carrying exhaustion, starvation, humiliation, pride, rage, and shattered souls. And every once in a while, life walks in wearing a tailored Italian suit, flashing a diamond-encrusted watch, and smirking as if the law were a toy meant only for other people. I still remember the sound echoing in that room that day. Not the initial noise, but the sound that crashed down immediately afterward. It was the sound of an entire courtroom falling dead silent at the exact same moment. Not a polite, empty silence. I mean the kind of deathly stillness that falls when an ugly, naked, and agonizing truth is finally spoken out loud. When everyone present in the room realizes they are staring straight into the bleeding soul of a human being. I have lived through countless silences in my lifetime on the bench. But the silence of that day was entirely different. That silence had weight. And the strangest part was, on paper, the case didn't look like much. In black and white, it was just petty theft, a case of stealing a few items of food from a supermarket. The kind of case most people would dismiss with a click of their tongue, assuming it would be boring and over in a flash. A fine, a warning, a weary shake of the head, maybe 5 minutes max. But I have learned one thing over all these years. The greatest, most brutal truths about human nature do not usually appear in sensational murder trials or front-page scandals. They hide in the smallest moments. They hide in the way a man with money tramples on the dignity of an aging security guard who is desperately clinging to his job just to feed his family. And when I tell you what that frail man said to my face, and the bitter reason behind those words, you will understand why this verdict is forever etched into my mind. It didn't just test the limits of my patience. It shattered all my beliefs about what we call justice. It forced me to think about power, about the things money can cover up, and it reminded me of one absolute rule. There is never such a thing as a small act of cruelty, especially when the person enduring it is already carrying far too much pain. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day. I woke up at 4:30 inches the morning, a habit burned deep into my blood from my days as a prosecutor ruthlessly hunting criminals on the streets. At 68 years old, your body does not need much sleep. What it needs is a purpose to keep existing. I stepped out onto the balcony of my apartment, looking down at the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. This city always carries a ruthless beauty in the early hours, when the blinking neon lights fade, giving way to the gray, cold light of reality. My wife, Martha, passed away exactly 5 years ago. Ever since the day she left, the silence in this house occasionally becomes deafening. I brewed myself a cup of thick black coffee, no sugar, no cream. That bitter taste washed down my throat, a sharp reminder that the world out there is neither sweet nor forgiving. As I took a sip, my mind drifted back to the words of the old judge who mentored me during my very first days in the legal profession. He used to look me dead in the eye and say, "Boyd, when you put on that black robe, you are no longer an ordinary man with personal desires or tempers. You are the last line of defense between order and chaos. Power isn't something for you to flaunt or use for intimidation. Power exists so you can protect those who cannot protect themselves. But be careful, because the line between a righteous judge and a tyrant is as thin as a sheet of paper." Those words have never faded from my mind. There are arrogant, boastful fools who believe the law is a weapon meant to crush the vulnerable. They are dead wrong. The law, in its most primal and purest form, must be a shield. I tied my gray tie, put on my suit jacket, and stepped out the door. The streets were just waking up. Exhausted sanitation workers were clearing away the wreckage of the night before. An elderly woman shivered in a worn-out coat, desperately trying to sell the morning papers. At the exact same moment, a stockbroker rushed out of a luxury car, barking orders at someone over his phone. That is everyday life, and the law always touches the most ordinary fragments of it. We often talk about the public or citizens as if they were abstract, macroscopic concepts, forgetting that they are simply flesh and blood human beings clawing and fighting just to survive another day. When I walked into the courtroom, Christina, my devoted clerk of 15 years, was already at her desk. She knew all my habits. She understood every single one of my frowns. Today, when Christina looked up at me, there was a strange tension in her eyes. "Good morning, Judge," she said, her voice dropping a fraction lower than usual. "There is a file you really need to look at closely. It is not like the ones you usually handle." Slowly, she placed a thin manila folder on my desk. On top of it was a bright red warning label. Her eyes did not show panic, but rather the grim warning of a massive storm about to sweep through this room. I took my seat at the bench a few minutes before 9 o'clock. The wooden gavel rested in its usual place, the handle worn smooth by decades of delivering consequences. I always take a brief moment to look out over the gallery before the first case is called. Every face out there is a story, a burden, a fracture in the system. The morning docket was heavy with the usual parade of unpaid citations, minor disputes, and municipal violations. I dispensed with them efficiently. I have never believed in wasting time, but I also never rush a person who is standing in front of me trembling with genuine fear. Over the years, you learn to tell the exact difference between the nervous sweat of a habitual liar and the quiet terror of a citizen who feels the crushing weight of the state bearing down on them. Around 10:30, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The air in the room seemed to instantly shift. A young man walked in, radiating that specific kind of careless energy that belongs exclusively to people who have never had to face a real consequence in their entire lives. He was late, of course, but he did not rush. He wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than my clerk makes in 6 months. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and a heavy gold watch slipped out from under his cuff every time he checked his phone. He was accompanied by an attorney who reeked of expensive cologne and aggressive hourly billing. They took their seats in the front row, whispering to each other, occasionally letting out a low, arrogant chuckle. They looked completely unbothered, treating my courtroom like a tedious waiting room at a luxury country club. Then, my eyes moved to the other side of the aisle. Sitting completely alone was the man I had read about in the red-labeled folder, Arthur Pendelton, 68 years old. He was wearing a faded gray uniform, the kind issued to overnight security guards. The fabric was frayed at the cuffs, and his shoulders were slumped, as if an invisible weight was pressing him deep into the wooden bench. His hands, rough and deeply calloused, were clasped tightly in his lap. He looked exhausted, not just tired from a long shift, but tired deep in his bones. The kind of exhaustion that comes from a lifetime of playing by the rules and still losing. The contrast was absolutely sickening. One side was buffered by immense wealth, insulated from reality, expecting to easily manipulate the day to their advantage. The other side was stripped of dignity, bracing for impact, having nothing left in the world but the truth. I picked up my gavel and tapped the wooden block once. The sharp, violent crack echoed against the high ceiling, instantly killing the wealthy kid's smirk. The whispers stopped. The room froze. Case number 88402. I announced, my voice cutting through the dead, heavy air. The state versus Julian Vance. The young man stood up, adjusting his expensive tie, acting as if he were about to order a cocktail rather than answer to the law. I looked down at the file, then looked directly into his eyes, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him deeply uncomfortable. The trial that would change everything had officially begun. "Mr. Vance," I began, my voice deliberately flat, echoing slightly in the vastness of the room. "You are charged with misdemeanor assault and willful destruction of property. The police report states that late Thursday night, you purposefully destroyed a street vendor's food cart and physically assaulted the working attendant." Before the young man could even open his mouth, his attorney stepped forward, slick, overconfident, and heavily perfumed. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. This is a massive misunderstanding. Mr. Vance was simply defending himself from an aggressive panhandler who initiated the confrontation. We are prepared to offer a generous financial settlement to the city and the court to make this unfortunate nuisance go away. A settlement, the magic word that people like him use to erase their sins. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. I looked past the expensive lawyer and fixed my gaze directly on Julian. He was casually inspecting his fingernails, utterly bored by the proceedings, as if my courtroom was beneath his attention. Is that so? I said, leaning forward. A generous settlement. Tell me, counselor, does this generous settlement cover the dignity of the man your client violently shoved to the concrete? The lawyer opened his mouth to deliver another rehearsed line, but I held up my hand, cutting him off instantly. I do not want to hear another word from you. I want to hear from the plaintiff. I turned my attention to the frail figure sitting on the other side of the aisle. Arthur Pendelton slowly stood up. He looked as though a stiff gust of wind could knock him over. His calloused hands were trembling violently as he clutched a crumpled paper hat, the kind they make you wear when you serve cheap food on the street. Mr. Pendelton, I said, softening my voice just a fraction, a rare occurrence in my courtroom. You do not need a lawyer to tell me what happened. Just tell me the truth. Arthur swallowed hard. He did not look angry. He looked entirely broken. I was just doing my job, Your Honor, he began, his voice raspy and barely above a whisper. I work the night shift at the plaza. I sell hot dogs and pretzels. It is not much, but it pays for my sick wife's medication. This young man, he came out of the VIP club across the street. He was laughing with his friends. He walked right up to my cart, grabbed trays of my food, and started throwing them into the wet street, just tossing them into the gutter, like it was a game. Julian Vance scoffed loudly, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was expired. Garbage, he muttered under his breath. I did everyone a public service. The entire courtroom inhaled sharply. It was the sound of a room realizing they were in the presence of something genuinely rotten. I did not yell. I did not bang my gavel. I simply stared at Julian until his arrogant smirk began to falter under the sheer, crushing weight of my silence. He threw the food, Arthur continued, tears welling in his tired, sunken eyes. And when I stepped forward to stop him, he shoved me hard into the pavement. He told me I was a filthy beggar. He said I was trash. But, Your Honor, I wasn't begging. I was working. Arthur paused, his grip on the paper hat tightening until his knuckles turned completely white. And then he looked me dead in the eye and delivered the exact words that brought my courtroom to a grinding halt. I was working, Arthur whispered, his voice cracking with a pain so deep it made my own chest ache. Because I haven't eaten in 2 days. I was saving my only portion of food so my wife could have dinner. I have heard many confessions in my life. I have heard murderers beg for mercy and thieves swear on their mothers' graves. But the raw, unadorned honesty in Arthur Pendleton's voice struck the room with the force of a physical blow. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Those words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. In the gallery, a woman put her hand over her mouth. Even the court reporter, a man who had typed out the gruesome details of 1,000 tragedies, stopped typing and simply stared. I looked back at Julian Vance. For the first time since he swaggered through those heavy oak doors, the arrogant smirk was completely wiped from his face. But it was not remorse that replaced it. It was discomfort, the restless, squirming discomfort of a spoiled boy who suddenly realizes his family's money cannot buy him a shield against public shame. His attorney, sensing the catastrophic shift in the room's atmosphere, panicked. Your Honor, he stammered, his voice an octave higher and much faster than before. This is clearly a highly emotional plea. While my client feels deep sympathy for Mr. Pendleton's unfortunate financial situation, it does not change the fact that an unpredictable altercation occurred. We are willing to double the settlement, $5,000 directly to the plaintiff right now, today. I felt a heat rise in my chest, a cold, calculated fury that only a judge facing pure insolence can summon. Counselor, I said softly, dangerously softly, if you utter the word settlement one more time in my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiff lock you in a holding cell before you can even blink. Sit down and shut your mouth. Now. The expensive lawyer collapsed into his chair as if his legs had been violently kicked out from under him. The room became so intensely quiet you could hear the heavy, ragged breathing of the old man standing across the aisle. I turned my eyes entirely onto Julian Vance. He looked incredibly small now. The bespoke Italian suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume he had borrowed from a much larger man. "Mr. Vance," I said, making sure every single word dripped with absolute disdain. "You destroyed a man's livelihood because you were mildly inconvenienced. You threw his food into the gutter like it was trash, simply because you have never known a single day of real hunger in your entire privileged life. You called him a beggar. But let me tell you exactly what I see." I pointed a finger directly at Arthur, whose head was still bowed. "I see a man who stands tall, a man who works through the freezing night to provide for his sick wife, a man who starves himself just so the woman he loves can have one decent meal." I paused, letting the silence stretch, before dropping my gaze back to Julian like an anvil. "And then I look at you, and all I see is a weak, pathetic little boy throwing a tantrum because he thinks his bank account makes him a man." Julian opened his mouth, perhaps to utter some empty, rehearsed apology, or perhaps to hide behind his family name once again, but I did not give him the chance. I leaned over the bench, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that demanded absolute silence from everyone in the room. "For the charges of misdemeanor assault and willful destruction of property," I announced, "I am not going to simply fine you. To a man like you, a fine is nothing but a small luxury tax on your arrogance. It teaches you absolutely nothing. And I am not going to send you to the county jail either. Sitting in a cell for 30 days would only make you a martyr in your own delusional mind." Julian blinked, a flicker of genuine terror finally breaking through his polished facade. He desperately looked at his attorney, but the expensive lawyer was staring fixedly at his own shoes, completely unwilling to step into my line of fire. "Instead," I continued, "the weight of the law backing every single syllable, you are going to learn exactly what it means to serve the people you look down upon. First, you will pay full restitution to Mr. Pendelton. You will buy him a brand new food cart, top of the line. You will cover all of his lost wages, and you will personally pay for his wife's medical expenses for the next 3 years. And hear me clearly on this. You will not use a single dime of your father's corporate money to do it. You will liquidate your own personal assets. Sell that heavy gold watch currently sitting on your wrist. Sell whatever luxury sports car you parked outside this morning. I do not care how you do it, but my court will audit and verify the source of every single penny." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Julian's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale white. But I was far from finished. "Second," I declared, "you are sentenced to 500 hours of mandatory community service. But you will not be picking up trash on the highway where your rich friends can drive by and laugh. You are going to work in the kitchen of the downtown homeless shelter. You will scrub dirty pots, you will mop filthy floors, and you will serve hot meals to people who have actually not eaten in days. You will look them in the eye, and you will treat them with the utmost respect." I leaned in closer, making sure my gaze locked firmly onto his panicked eyes. "And if I hear that you rolled your eyes, if I hear that you gave a single person any attitude, or if you miss even 1 minute of those 500 hours, I will void this sentence and throw you into a maximum security cell for the absolute maximum time allowed by state law. Do you understand me, Mr. Vance?" Julian swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. "Speak up," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, much louder this time, his voice breaking entirely under the crushing weight of his own humiliation. The courtroom exhaled all at once. The heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the room finally broke, replaced by a profound sense of equilibrium. The expensive attorney hastily packed his leather briefcase, actively avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially his own client. Julian Vance stood perfectly still, staring blankly at the floor, the full weight of reality finally crushing his deeply sheltered existence. I turned my attention back to Arthur Pendelton. The old man was holding tightly onto the wooden railing, tears streaming freely down his deeply lined face. But he was no longer trembling from fear or humiliation. He was crying because, perhaps for the very first time in a long time, someone with real power had actually seen him. Someone had stood up and declared that his life, his hard work, and his dignity mattered just as much as anyone else in this city. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, my voice softening just enough to convey the absolute respect he deserved, "my clerk will provide you with all the necessary paperwork before you leave today. This court will personally ensure that every single term of this verdict is strictly enforced. You will get your business back. You will be able to take care of your wife. You have my word on that." Arthur wiped his eyes with the back of his rough, calloused hand and looked up at me. He did not say a single word, but the profound gratitude in his tired eyes spoke louder than any brilliant legal argument I have ever heard in my entire career. He simply nodded, a slow, dignified nod of a man who had finally reclaimed his humanity. I picked up my gavel. "This court is adjourned," I announced. The sharp crack of the wood signaled the end of the proceeding, but I knew perfectly well that the echo of this verdict would last far longer than the trial itself. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my quiet, dark office, staring out at the glowing city lights of Chicago, I thought deeply about the delicate balance of power. People in this world constantly confuse wealth with power and arrogance with strength, but true power does not lie in the ability to humiliate or destroy those beneath you. True power lies in the rare ability to restore balance, to lift up the broken, and to aggressively remind the so-called untouchable elites that they are, in fact, entirely accountable for their actions. Justice is not merely a blind, unfeeling machine processing human misery. It is a living, breathing shield. And on that freezing Thursday morning, it did exactly what it was built to do. People always ask me what happens after the gavel falls. They want to know if the spoiled kid actually learned his lesson, or if his wealthy father simply found a clever legal loophole. Let me be perfectly clear. There are no loopholes in my courtroom. 6 months after that trial, my clerk audited every single penny of the restitution. Julian Vance was forced to sell his luxury sports car. He did not use his family trust fund. He used his own liquid assets to buy Arthur Pendelton a brand new, fully equipped food cart. He paid the medical bills. And as for the 500 hours of community service, he completed every last minute of them. I received weekly reports from the director of the downtown homeless shelter. Julian scrubbed industrial pots, he mopped the dining hall, and he served hot meals to the absolute poorest citizens of Chicago. I do not know if that grueling work miraculously cured his arrogance, but it forced him to look the brutal reality of starvation dead in the eye. And sometimes, proximity to real suffering is the only cure for extreme privilege. A few weeks after his sentence was completed, a small envelope arrived at my chambers. Inside was a handwritten letter from Arthur. He did not write to thank me for the money or the new cart. He wrote to tell me that his wife was finally recovering, and that for the first time in years, he felt like a human being again. He thanked me for simply seeing him. That letter sits in the top drawer of my desk to this very day. It is a constant reminder of why I put on this heavy black robe every single morning. We live in a society that too often worships wealth and actively makes excuses for cruelty. We let the powerful rewrite the rules while the vulnerable are crushed beneath the wheels of the machine. But inside the four walls of a courtroom, the rules must be different. The law must be the great equalizer. It cannot care about the price tag on your suit, the heavy gold on your wrist, or the political connections your family holds. If life ever hands you power over another human being, I want you to remember Julian Vance and Arthur Pendleton. Power is the ultimate test of your character. It shows the world exactly who you are. Use it to protect, not to destroy. Use it to build up, not to tear down. Because true respect costs absolutely nothing, but it is worth everything. If you believe that money should never place a man above the law, then carry this story with you. Share it. Speak it out loud. I am Judge Boyd. Until the next time the gavel falls, take care of each other and always stand up for the truth.